Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it. I awoke to a blinding whiteness, the sterile smell of antiseptic, and a faint beeping sound that seemed to echo in my skull. My mind felt like it had been wrapped in cotton, and my body was sluggish, unresponsive. As the haze began to clear, I realized I was in a hospital room, the kind of place I had always dreaded. Lord, where am I? I muttered, my voice barely a whisper. And why does my body feel so weak? I tried to move, but my limbs were heavy and uncooperative. IV drips and various sensors trailed from my hands, making me feel more like a lab experiment than a patient. I squinted against the harsh light overhead, trying to focus on my surroundings. The first clear sound I heard was a voice I knew all too well. Karen, my wife. She was speaking on the phone, her tone hushed but urgent. I strained to hear, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and curiosity. Yes, Dr. Pearson, I understand. But how long will he lie there like a vegetable? Perhaps it's worth considering more radical measures, Karen said, her voice laced with a false note of concern. There was a pause, and then the doctor's voice replied, I understand your concerns, Mrs. Carter, but we must remain hopeful. Your husband has a chance, even if it's slim. My blood ran cold as the conversation continued. Karen's next words were what truly jolted me awake, my mind sharp and clear for the first time since I opened my eyes. Well, the sooner we can manage the will, the better. The restaurant needs proper handling, and once Alan is no longer with us, I'll inherit it as planned. A wave of nausea washed over me. Karen was planning my death to claim my inheritance. The woman I had loved and trusted was ready to betray me for money and power. I knew I had to act fast, but my body was still weak, my movements limited. With great effort, I managed to crack my eyes open slightly, just enough to see Karen pacing the room, her phone pressed to her ear. She was too engrossed in her conversation to notice my faint movements. I had to pretend to be in a coma, to buy time and figure out a way to stop her. I closed my eyes again, letting my body go limp. The next step was clear. I needed help, and fast, but who could I trust in this place? As the days passed, I continued to feign unconsciousness, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. Nurses came and went, doctors checked my vitals, but I remained a silent observer, gathering snippets of conversation and piecing together the truth of my situation. Karen visited occasionally, her demeanor always the same, sweet and concerned on the surface, but with a coldness underneath that chilled me to the bone. One afternoon, as I lay there with my eyes closed, I heard the door open and soft footsteps approach my bed. A gentle hand touched my arm and a familiar voice spoke. It was Nurse Brittany, one of the few people who seemed to genuinely care about my well-being. Hang in there, Mr. Carter, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You're stronger than you think. Her words gave me a glimmer of hope. Brittany was different from the other staff. She'd always spoke to me as if I could hear her, offering words of encouragement and updates on my condition. I had to find a way to communicate with her, to let her know that I was still here, trapped inside my own body. That evening, as Brittany made her rounds, I decided to take a risk. With all the strength I could muster, I moved my hand, just a little, but enough to catch her eye. Her gaze flicked to my hand, then to my face. Her eyes widened in shock, but she quickly composed herself. Dr. Pearson, can we discuss Mr. Carter's condition outside? She asked, her voice steady but urgent. They left the room, and I could hear their voices in the hallway. I prayed that Brittany had understood my signal, that she would come back alone. A few minutes later, she did. Mr. Carter, she whispered, leaning close. Can you hear me? I managed a slight nod, my eyes meeting hers. Relief and determination flickered in her eyes. I knew it, she murmured. I knew you were still in there. She took a deep breath. Listen, I overheard some things. I know your wife is planning something terrible. We need to figure out a way to keep you safe. I nodded again, grateful beyond words. Dr. Pearson, I rasped, my voice weak. He can't know. Brittany nodded. Don't worry, I'll handle him. We need to make it look like you're still in a coma, at least for a while. Can you manage that? I gave her a thumbs up, the best I could do. Brittany smiled, a fierce glint in her eyes. Good, I'll take care of everything. With Brittany and Dr. Pearson's help, we managed to keep up the charade. They told Karen that my condition was stable but unchanged, buying us precious time. Each day, Brittany and I would whisper plans, slowly piecing together the puzzle of Karen's betrayal. One day, as Brittany adjusted my IV drip, she leaned in closer and whispered, "I've been doing some digging. It turns out Karen has been meeting with a lawyer regularly. She's been preparing for your death." The words sent a fresh wave of anger through me, but I kept my expression neutral. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "We need more evidence," Brittany replied. "Something concrete to show the authorities. I have an idea, but it's risky." "Tell me," I said, my mind racing with possibilities. Brittany explained her plan, and as I listened, I felt a spark of hope. It was dangerous, but it could work. We decided to put the plan into action the next day. The following morning, Dr. Pearson and Nurse Brittany set the stage. They convinced Karen that my condition had worsened and that it was time to discuss end-of-life decisions. Karen arrived at the hospital, her face a mask of concern, but I could see the anticipation in her eyes. As she sat beside my bed, Brittany left the room, ostensibly to get some forms for Karen to sign. In reality, she was setting up a recording device in the hallway, ready to capture every word of Karen's conversation with Dr. Pearson. "Mrs. Carter," Dr. Pearson began, his tone grave, "I'm afraid we need to discuss some difficult options. Alan's condition is deteriorating, and we need to consider what steps to take next." Karen feigned a look of sorrow. "I understand, doctor. What do you recommend?" "We could continue with aggressive treatment, but it may only prolong his suffering," Dr. Pearson said, glancing at me. "Or we could transition to palliative care, focusing on his comfort in his final days." Karen hesitated, then nodded. "I think it's time to let him go peacefully." Dr. Pearson gave a solemn nod. "I'll need your signature on these forms to authorize the transition." As Karen took the pen, my heart pounded. This was the moment we had been waiting for. Brittany re-entered the room, holding the recording device behind her back. She gave me a subtle nod, signaling that everything was in place. Karen signed the forms, her expression a mix of relief and false sadness. "Thank you, doctor. I just want what's best for Alan." "Of course," Dr. Pearson replied. "We'll make sure he's comfortable." After Karen left, Brittany showed me the recording. We had everything we needed to expose her plans. As I watched her sign my death warrant, I felt a surge of determination. This was far from over. With Brittany and Dr. Pearson's help, I would survive this ordeal and bring Karen to justice. The room was dim, the only light coming from the small lamp beside my hospital bed. Nurse Brittany and Dr. Pearson stood by the door, their faces etched with worry and determination. The air was thick with the weight of our plan, each of us knowing that the slightest misstep could spell disaster. "We need to make sure she doesn't suspect anything," Brittany said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Pearson, you need to keep up the act. Make her believe that Alan's condition is still critical." Dr. Pearson nodded, his expression serious. "I'll handle it." "Alan, are you ready for this?" I nodded, my resolve firm. "Let's do it." With a final look of determination, Brittany and Dr. Pearson left the room, leaving me alone in the dim light. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. The next few days would be crucial. The following morning, Brittany and Dr. Pearson set the stage. They convinced Karen that my condition had worsened, feeding her lies about my deteriorating health. Karen arrived at the hospital, her face a mask of concern, but I could see the anticipation in her eyes. "Mrs. Carter," Dr. Pearson began, his tone grave, "I'm afraid we need to discuss some difficult options. Alan's condition is deteriorating, and we need to consider what steps to take next." Karen feigned a look of sorrow. "I understand, doctor. What do you recommend?" "We could continue with aggressive treatment, but it may only prolong his suffering," Dr. Pearson said, glancing at me. "Or we could transition to palliative care, focusing on his comfort in his final days." Karen hesitated, then nodded. "I think it's time to let him go peacefully." Dr. Pearson gave a solemn nod. "I'll need your signature on these forms to authorize the transition." As Karen took the pen, my heart pounded. This was the moment we had been waiting for. Brittany re-entered the room, holding the recording device behind her back. She gave me a subtle nod, signaling that everything was in place. Karen signed the forms, her expression a mix of relief and false sadness. "Thank you, doctor. I just want what's best for Alan." "Of course," Dr. Pearson replied. "We'll make sure if he's comfortable." After Karen left, Brittany showed me the recording. We had everything we needed to expose her plans. As I watched her sign my death warrant, I felt a surge of determination. This was far from over. With Brittany and Dr. Pearson's help, I would survive this ordeal and bring Karen to justice. The days passed in a blur of whispered conversations and careful planning. Brittany and Dr. Pearson were my lifelines, keeping me informed and helping me devise a strategy. We needed more evidence, something that would undeniably prove Karen's malicious intent. One evening, as Brittany was adjusting my IV drip, she leaned in close. "Alan, we need to get access to your home. There might be documents or correspondence that can strengthen our case." I nodded. "How do we do that?" "Leave it to me," she said, a determined glint in her eye. "I'll figure something out." The next day, Brittany called Karen, her voice trembling with false concern. "Mrs. Carter, I need to speak with you urgently. Can you come to the hospital?" Karen arrived an hour later, her face twisted with impatience. "What is it now?" "There's been a complication," Brittany said, her voice steady despite the nerves I knew she must be feeling. "We need you to sign some additional paperwork." Karen sighed dramatically. "Fine, let's get this over with." As Brittany led Karen to a nearby office, she glanced back at me, giving a subtle nod. I knew she was about to put our next phase into action. With Karen occupied, Dr. Pearson slipped into my room. "Alan, we need to move quickly. Brittany is distracting your wife, but it won't last long." I struggled to sit up, my muscles weak from days of inactivity. Dr. Pearson helped me, his grip firm and reassuring. "We need to make it look like you're still here," he said, arranging pillows under the blanket to create the illusion of my sleeping form. Once satisfied with the setup, he handed me a set of clothes. "Get dressed. Brittany has arranged for a car to take you to your house. Be quick and careful." With great effort, I dressed and followed Dr. Pearson out of the room. We navigated the hospital's corridors with caution, avoiding any staff that might recognize me. At the rear entrance, a car waited, the driver a trusted friend of Brittany's. "Good luck," Dr. Pearson said, his expression serious. "We'll keep Karen busy as long as we can." I nodded, gratitude and determination swelling within me. "Thank you for everything." As the car sped towards my home, I couldn't shake the mixture of fear and excitement coursing through me. This was my chance to uncover the full extent of Karen's betrayal and gather the evidence needed to bring her to justice. When we arrived, the house was eerily quiet. I moved through the familiar rooms with caution, searching for anything that could incriminate Karen. In the study, I found what I was looking for, a folder filled with documents detailing her plans to take over the restaurant and correspondence with her lawyer. As I sifted through the papers, a noise from the hallway made me freeze. Footsteps. Someone was here. I quickly hid behind the desk, my heart pounding. The door creaked open and I heard Karen's voice, followed by a man's. "Don't worry, darling," the man said. "Everything is going according to plan. Soon, the restaurant will be ours." Karen laughed, a sound that now filled me with dread. "I know, but I can't help feeling nervous. What if Alan wakes up?" "He won't," the man replied confidently. "And even if he does, we'll be ready." My mind raced. This was the proof we needed, but I had to get out of there without being seen. As they moved further into the room, I slipped out, making my way back to the car. Back at the hospital, I handed the documents to Brittany. "This should be enough," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. Brittany nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "We'll make sure she pays for what she's done." As we continued to orchestrate our plan, the reality of Karen's betrayal hit me harder than ever. But with Brittany and Dr. Pearson by my side, I knew we had a fighting chance to bring her to justice and reclaim my life. The moon hung low in the night sky, casting a silvery glow over the hospital. I lay in my hospital bed, my mind racing with thoughts of the incriminating documents we had gathered. The proof of Karen's betrayal was irrefutable, but we needed to act quickly and decisively. As I pondered our next move, Nurse Brittany entered the room, her expression a mix of urgency and determination. "Alan, we need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. "Dr. Pearson and I have devised a plan to expose Karen's treachery, but it requires your cooperation and a bit of risk." "I'm ready," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Tell me what I need to do." Brittany took a deep breath. "We'll stage a dramatic awakening for you. The idea is to catch Karen off guard in front of enough witnesses to ensure she can't talk her way out of it. We'll invite her to a final consultation with Dr. Pearson, and that's when you'll make your entrance." My heart pounded at the thought of confronting Karen face to face. "And then what?" "Then," Brittany said with a determined glint in her eye, "we reveal the evidence we collected and confront her about the affair and her plans to take over your restaurant. We need to make sure there are enough witnesses to hold her accountable." I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "Let's do it." The next morning, Brittany and Dr. Pearson set the wheels in motion. They called Karen and scheduled a meeting for later that afternoon. I spent the day rehearsing my part in the plan, going over the details in my mind until I was confident I could pull it off. As the appointed time approached, Brittany wheeled me into a different room, one with large windows and plenty of seating. Dr. Pearson had arranged for several nurses and a couple of trusted friends to be present, ensuring there would be plenty of witnesses. "Remember, Alan," Brittany whispered as she adjusted my IV drip, "the key is to act as if you're still weak and disoriented. We want to catch Karen off guard." I nodded, my nerves taut as a bowstring. "Got it." A few minutes later, the door swung open and Karen walked in, her expression a carefully crafted mask of concern. She was followed by her lover, a slick-looking man with a smug grin that made my blood boil. "Thank you for coming," Dr. Pearson said, his tone grave. "We have some important matters to discuss regarding Alan's condition." Karen's eyes flicked to me, a flicker of surprise crossing her face at the sight of me sitting up. "Alan, you're awake." I mustered my best weak smile. "Barely, but I needed to see you." Karen's lover stepped forward, his grin widening. "This is a surprise. We were told you might never wake up." Dr. Pearson cleared his throat. "Yes, well, sometimes miracles happen, but there's more to discuss." Before Karen could respond, Brittany stepped forward, holding up the folder of documents we had gathered. "Mrs. Carter, we need to talk about these." Karen's face paled as she recognized the documents. What? What is this?" "It's evidence," I said, my voice gaining strength. "Evidence of your plans to take over my restaurant, of your affair, and of your intentions to let me die so you could inherit everything." Karen's lover sneered. "This is absurd. You have no proof." "Oh, but we do," Brittany said, her voice steady. "We have recordings, documents, and witnesses. Everything we need to expose the truth." As Brittany laid out the evidence, Karen's facade began to crumble. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. "This is all a misunderstanding," she stammered. "I would never." "Save it," I interrupted, my anger boiling over. "I've heard enough. You've been plotting behind my back, hoping to benefit from my death. But it's over, Karen. You're finished." Karen's lover stepped forward, his face twisted in anger. "You can't do this. We'll fight you every step of the way." "Good luck with that," Dr. Pearson said calmly, "because we have enough to ensure neither of you will walk away unscathed." As the tension in the room reached its peak, the door opened again, and a police officer walked in, flanked by two detectives. "Mr. Carter, we've been briefed on the situation. We're here to take statements and gather all the evidence." Karen's face turned ashen. You called the police?" "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "And they will ensure justice is served." Over the next hour, the police took statements from everyone present. Karen and her lover tried to deny everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. As the police escorted them out, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. "I can't thank you enough," I said to Brittany and Dr. Pearson. "You saved my life and helped me expose the truth." Brittany smiled, her eyes shining with relief. "It was the right thing to do, and now you can start to rebuild your life." Dr. Pearson nodded. "We'll support you every step of the way, Alan. You're not alone in this." As I watched Karen and her lover being led away, I knew the road ahead would be difficult. But with the support of my newfound friends, I was ready to face whatever challenges came my way. The truth had been revealed, and justice would be served.